So, to continue the theme of the importance of history in understanding where we stand today, um, I've been thinking a lot about religion and how, nowadays we say, yeah, we're all secular and we all, or at least some of us, those of us who think that we are more enlightened or modern or civilized or rational than, say, theists or radicals or extremists. We all have gotten over God, or the God specific to a literalized mythological belief in the stories of the Bible and the cosmology associated with the theological tradition through the Middle Ages, back to Aristotle, I guess, but the notion that we are embedded in a universe which has been created by a distant and supreme Godhead is something that we as secular atheists consider antiquated at best, at worst pathological, a relic of a time when we just didn't have the scientific knowledge and rational know-how to come up with a more plausible story. But this is a sort of naive explanation or narrative for what actually happened in this process, because to so quickly put down those millions of people who not only believed in this picture of the universe, this biblical Christian story, this religious story, but lived it. They didn't think of this religion that they were following, that they were embedded in, as a choice, as something that they picked, knowing there are other options, knowing there are other possibilities. They lived in a world where there was a God, and there was a Satan, there was evil in the world, and there were certain desires to do certain things that they felt and that they experienced as bad, and something that they needed the help of a most definitely good and all-powerful being to get them through. That it's like a security blanket in a sense. But okay, let's say we were children back then, or at least more inexperienced and unweathered than we are today. We needed that security blanket. It was to help us grow into the world. But we're still growing, and just because human beings as children needed this security blanket to get them through the scary darkness of, medieval times, doesn't mean that that sense of the transcendent or the divine or the sacred was an illusion. It just means that they projected that sense outside and above them as something to be bowed down to and obeyed, as though the law which we must obey was known to man in a very definite way. It was written in the Bible. There's the Ten Commandments. And then for Christianity, there's the gospel and the theology that the church creates, and the Bible itself. The dogmas and the doctrines are what's important. And those doctrines led people to do some pretty immoral things, but none of us today, in the adulthood of humanity, say, can take seriously the idea that any single book could contain in it all the answers and laws and rules of this earth. But just because that's obviously something to do away with and to grow out of, the idea that God is also something somewhat of a childhood fairy tale that we believe in for a time and then should then grow up to forget and move on and accept a reality where there is no transcendent meaning. The problem seems to me to be that we can't accept that. We may aspire to it. But what is it that someone like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens believes? What is their goal in life, or their goal for this experience? Meaning, they don't assign their lives a particular value. As a dedicated scientist, at least in the case of Dawkins, he seems to be oriented towards, or he's motivated by, the idea of adding to this mass of objective scientific knowledge, so that one day people will be able to look at it all and know that what everything is in place, under control, known, understood, rationalized. Is that what he's after? Because if that is his goal, well, he's believing in a God or a transcendent goal in the future, which is fundamentally, at its experiential level, no different than what the children of the Middle Ages, the theists who believed in God, the Christian God of the Bible, he's believing in the same type of a transcendent purpose that, in both cases, I don't think can ever be attained or reached. It's sort of a false idol, which leads us to the idea of what the old age, the wisdom and true maturity of humanity might look like, the future of whatever's beyond the Enlightenment and beyond modernity. I don't know what that world is going to look like. I mean, it's already emerging now, but it hasn't reached a definable stage yet where we can really look back at the modern times, the Enlightenment, the birth of nations, and the birth of the idea that individuals either face God, alone, and they don't need a church to mediate their relationship with God, or that individuals don't need a God at all, and that somehow they gain these ontological rights, these human rights as individuals, according to the constitutions of their nations, or the common laws of their nations, but they don't assign that attribute of themselves to any God. They assign it to their ego, which they are because they say they are. I think, therefore I am. So it's a little bit, it's still a weird claim to make, isn't it? It's still a transcendent ideal, the ego, the identity, the stable, secure self that can control its action in the world. And not only control it, but deliberate and reflect and rationalize everything. These are both mythological stories, whether we're atheists or we're theists, whether we're living in the Middle Ages or in modern times. Most of us still believe in some type of a metaphysical narrative of how it is that we exist as we think we do. We all have goals and aspirations. Even Richard Dawkins has a goal in his life, in his activity as a scientist. And that goal in itself, for total knowledge of the world, is that what we want, even? The increase in knowledge that has occurred over the last few hundred years has been echoed by an increase in violence, and a very sinister kind of violence that's covered up with doublespeak. Civilization, colonialization, and mercantilism, and this type of thing. In the country itself, they exploit Africa and they exploit the Middle East in the name of freedom and democracy and liberation of the native peoples there. But on the ground in those countries, they're actually killing hundreds of thousands of people and subjugating them, taking away their freedoms, forcing them to conform to what, from an objective point of view, is really our religion. We're capitalist missionaries going into native lands to exploit their resources and force them to start forming the modern economy in the way that we have it set up and that they can just somehow learn to do as if it were obviously better than what they were doing. My time is up.